Todd Blanche has demonstrated already, he has the qualifications. Now, of course, he was a top lawyer, top prosecutor in New York. He doesn't have the character. Okay? Pam Bondi essentially made a confession by saying that it was Epstein, it was Blanche who handled the Epstein files. She was really a show horse. He was the workhorse. So the work of this Justice Department over the first year and a half was really Todd Blanche's. And time again, when Donald Trump's personal interests are at stake, and they conflict with the nation's interest, like this slush fund, like the tax settlement with the Trump family and companies, he goes with his client, Donald Trump, rather than with Donald Trump.
Well, let's not also forget the prosecutions that he has attempted to launch just in the last few months. I mean, Jim Comey over the Seychelles and so many other things. He was talking to Sean Hannity, the Fox host, on his podcast earlier this week. And here's how he said he looks at the task ahead of him in his job at DOJ.
This is blatant, the purest form of weaponization, because he was the president. It's not, yeah, we can talk about what happened after he left, but he was the leader of the free world, and his people that worked in the executive. Okay, so they work for him, and make no mistake, everybody in the executive works for the president of the United States. And now we're sitting here saying, okay, so what are we doing? We're investigating. We have a bunch of guys investigating. Anybody, honestly, any prosecutor in this government that raises their hand and says, I want to find out what happened, I want to investigate, we have the tools in place to get them where they need to be to do it. And so the time is not our friend.
You know, Arthur, that's quite the view of the DOJ. I mean, I think about all the various things that the DOJ is responsible for prosecuting, and it seems like Todd Blanche seems to think that the most important thing is finding attorneys anywhere in the nation who want to go after President Trump's perceived enemies.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that was my takeaway from that. Look.
What was your takeaway from it?
Well, let me just give you a little my basis of speaking here. I work in the community where Todd was a U.S. attorney in the Southern District. I didn't know him personally then. I did have an encounter with him when he was representing the president in the courthouse. But he does enjoy amongst his colleagues an excellent reputation for his integrity, his knowledge of the law, and knowing, like, look, if you could look at the Trump administration, there are a lot of people who are in positions, and we may talk about one of them today, that really have no reason to be there. Todd does know the law. I mean, he knows the federal law, and he was in the Southern District, and that's where he was trained. I think a lot of people in the legal community who have to deal with not the stories you cover, but the day in and day out cases that I deal with on a regular, but not the headline cases. No. They're happy to have Todd Blanche there because he's level-headed, he's reasonable, and he was the DAG. The Deputy Attorney General really runs the office. Now, when people say about with the Epstein files, he was covering up for Trump. There's so much misconception. You had Ana Navarro on here who went off on Brett Ratner, the director, about the Epstein files, and he's all over them. That's just blatantly false. That's an absolute lie.
Just to be clear, she was talking about the allegations about Brett Ratner that were actually not related to the Epstein files that caused him to be,
Well, I know she mentioned
his
something
fall
about
from
it.
grace,
She said
so
the
to
term
speak,
he was
from
all over the Epstein files, and he's not. There's a picture of him and his fiancée.
But there are other allegations against Brett Ratner that have nothing to do with the Epstein files. That's also what.
But I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how Todd Blanche cut up for Donald Trump regarding the Epstein files. Well, there may be ways that the Epstein files came out that people aren't happy with. I don't think that's one of them.
I can tell you how he covered up for him. Todd Blanche went down to Florida and met with Ghislaine Maxwell.
My client.
Met with her in prison, and then mysteriously she ends up in a lower security prison in Texas. But that does not.
But you said at the time, Arthur, that you thought that was basically a quid pro quo.
Let me just be very clear. I don't know that for a fact. I want to make that blatantly clear. I've spoken to Ghislaine not that long ago. First of all, people get moved within the system all the time. They just moved to Raniere, who's doing 120 years to a less restrictive.
But you basically said, I mean, let's. I believe you. I believe you when you say maybe you don't know firsthand exactly what transpired in that conversation. But you basically said that no one would avail their client in a situation like that unless they were getting something out of it.
Yeah.
And that the move from
That's common sense.
a high security prison to a low security prison would be, I'll use your words, a common sense outcome.
Let me just make it very clear. I did not represent Ghislaine on the conversations with Todd. We did her appeal, but yes, I'm not going to bring any client in to see any prosecutor unless I know there's some benefit for my client.
Is that ethical?